Hi, this is Dr. Mike Barnes. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at Foundry Treatment Center in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I would like to welcome you to our new sort of family introduction video. And this is really a video that I've been wanting to put together for a long time. I know you talk with Annie, and Annie and I talk daily about, what is it that families need to hear, and what are the most helpful things that we can say and do for families. And so this is a video that we've put together in terms of really looking at opportunities for helping families deal with this really complicated and sometimes difficult time. So the first thing is to say, congratulations. Your loved one made it to treatment, and that's a very good thing. And I know that is a very difficult time for families, particularly, the fear of what's going to happen if they say no, and I'm not going to go, and if interventions are done, and how difficult that is emotionally on everyone involved. And so I recognize that some families, this might be the very first time your loved one's ever been in treatment. So you may be incredibly anxious. Like, how's this going to go? Did we pick the right place? Are they going to get the help that they need at this point? Others may be really relieved. This is an opportunity for a period of respite, to catch your breath, take care of the kids, not have to worry every day, every night of what's going to happen. Is the phone going to ring? And so the message that I want to start with is, it's really important to understand that your loved one is involved in about 40 hours a week of clinical activities. And they may say, oh, we were working with the horses in equine therapy, and we were in the gym, and they may paint a picture that is summer campish, for lack of a better word. And I want to assure you that they're not in summer camp, that there are very stringent groups, and there are really difficult sessions that they're going to have to work in, and that they may not be ready to do that. And so we're working to get them where we think they need to be. So please understand that this is not an easy process for them as well. And what could you be doing, or what should you be doing throughout this time period? And I know it's not unusual to talk to families and family members that say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not the one that did this to the family. Why do I need to do anything? He's the one that needs to be doing that work. And so for the next several minutes, I'll be kind of talking about why I think family healing is so important. And, for years, I found a paper that I wrote in my graduate program back in 1991, and it was a critique of how treatment centers interact with families. And I found that paper in a box recently, and started reading it, and I thought, wow, nothing's changed in 30 years. And so and there are a lot of reasons why the client is the client and the family is not. And they're mostly insurance and confidentiality laws. And there are a lot of really legitimate reasons. Personally, I am of the opinion, and you'll understand my reasoning, is that it's really about family recovery and family healing. And if the client heals and the family doesn't, or the client changes and the family doesn't, that it's actually going to divide the family more than not. So these are some of my ideas about things that I think I'd like you to know more than anything. And so I don't have a slide on this, but I was looking at my website today, and I was doing a family lecture with Annie, with the clients, and I reminded them that successful therapy is built on a foundation of really difficult conversations. And that's one of the things that the clients are learning to do while they're here. And I think it's really important that they're going to need to learn to do that with you too, and that you're going to need to do that with them. And there's a lot of emotion and resentments and anger, and those things are going to divide the family if the family doesn't take some steps to resolve those. And I'm not saying to do it right away, but I'm saying ultimately these things have to happen. So every family and every family member deals with their loved one's addiction in very different ways. And so there's no blame. That's the last thing we would ever do. But there really is a blueprint. And family healing is the blueprint. And so I've done enough research and worked with enough families to realize that living with an actively using addicted individual is perceived by families, and I'll cite some research that we did on this, as being traumatizing. And if family members have a history of having grown up in their own family of origin, and it also had a history of addiction or mental health issues or abuse or trauma, or dealing with people with chronic illness, addiction is a chronic disease. And so if we really look at the medical environment, and what does the medical environment do in terms of dealing with and engaging the family to be able to live more effectively in a more healthy way with a family member with a chronic disease. The family is an integral part in that process, more so than it is in most addiction programs. Even though we talk about addiction as a family disease or as a chronic disease, we don't really treat it that way with families. And we're working on a program to remedy that. So it's probably good to tell a story. And this is a story about a father. And when I worked at a previous treatment center, I was walking through the admissions department. And the father said to me, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And I said, "Certainly." And for the next 20 minutes, the father told me about his son being a chronic liar. And he no holds barred. He said, "Your staff need to understand he will lie to your face. He will tell you untruth without blinking an eye." And I said, "Well, that's part of the illness. Like, we see that all the time." And the father said, "No, I don't think you understand. It's really important for your staff to keep an eye on my son, or he's not going to get what he needs." And I said, "I really appreciate you telling me that. I will tell the staff, and let's move forward." And so about a week later, I get a phone call from that father, and he is absolutely livid, like furious with me. "And you guys aren't doing any of the things that you said you were going to do. You guys are dishonest." And I said, whoa, hold on a second. What are you talking about?" And he said, "My son hasn't seen a physician. He hasn't seen a psychiatrist. He hasn't seen his therapist. He hasn't been going to groups. He hasn't done any of the things that you told me and the admissions team told me that was going to happen." And I stopped for a second and I thought, oh, his son probably just got off of what we used to call blackout period. Now we call an acclimation period, where they're not allowed to use the phone. And the son had just gotten his first opportunity to call his dad. And I said, "How would you know any of that? You're not here. You haven't seen any of it." And he said, he paused for a second, because I think he knew what was coming. And he said, "My son told me." And I said, "Is that the same son that you told me was such a liar? And that would lie to your face, and he would tell you all the things that he needed to tell you so that things would go his way?" And the father paused, and of course we're on the phone, so I can't see him. And I could hear, as he started to talk, that there was a lot of emotion in his voice. And the father said something I'll never forget. And the father said, "I just need you to know I love my son more than anything in the world. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that he gets what he needs." And I said, "Thank you. That's very important for me to hear. Now, can we talk Can we stop talking about your son and start talking about you? Because none of the things your son told you are true. And if you knew before you called me that they weren't true, or you would have never told me what a liar he was. But your anxiety associated with, if he doesn't get better, this is going to keep going. He's going to die. The family's going to continue to have to deal with this, whatever it is that was going on in your mind. And I said, I understand your anxiety more than anything. And are you open to looking at the fact that maybe this whole thing of dealing with a loved one with addiction has been more complicated and more difficult than you imagine? And that maybe your son's addiction has impacted you and your life in ways that you just don't see. And so would it be okay to talk about getting you in therapy? And at that point, we were able to get the father in therapy, and it really made a huge difference. So I'm not saying everyone needs to go to therapy, but I am saying that the willingness to be open to looking at, I may be really traumatized by this process. Growing up in my family of origin, I may be reacting in some of the same ways that I reacted back in those days. And so I would urge you to kind of keep an open mind as we're going through this video. So I use this mobile as a way of kind of representing how the family adjusts. We call it homeostasis. Like a mobile adjusts to wind to maintain stability and balance. All families adjust to life's demands to maintain stability and what we call system integrity, the idea of consistency. And if that family system is dealing with constant intoxication or the uncertainty of intoxication, anxiety, agitation, the trauma symptoms of intrusive thoughts or nightmares, dissociation, depression, suicidality, anger, conflict, arguments, legal, medical, employment issues, that over the course of time, the family begins to kind of adjust how it manages coping strategies and decision making and making sure that their loved one is getting what they need, and that over the course of time, the system and how it operates changes to accommodate the progressing addiction. And most families will say to me I don't think we've changed that much. We've certainly had to change to address the more advanced state of the addiction, but I don't think we're different in how we interact with each other and those kinds of things. And so that would be great. I hope that's the case. And so I asked them, when your loved one walks in the front door of your house and you hear the door open and you look up and you see that it is your loved one, how long does it take for you to determine whether that person is intoxicated or not? And there's always a variety of answers. Some people say, well, I could never tell if he was or wasn't. That's a very rare comment. The average answer to that question is 2 seconds. I want you to think about how hypervigilant that is. That within 2 seconds of the person walking in the door, the family members have already decided whether that person's intoxicated or not, and therefore it's going to adjust what's needed in order to cope. And when we ask family members, traumatized clients survive through a process of being hypervigilant of everything around them and trying to be in control of everything around them. And so when we talk about, well, don't you think 2 seconds is pretty hypervigilant? I will often get family members who will say to me, you don't understand. It's really different if they're intoxicated than if they're sober, because we don't know what's going to happen. And so again, it's that kind of subtle shifting in the balance of that system that so I wrote an article in Addiction Professional magazine a couple years ago that talked about how often families will say to me, I just wish my loved one would get sober so we could go back to normal. And so if we look at the next slide, this is what's called Jelinek's curve. And if I moved the mobile out of the way, here's the progression of the disease. Now, this is Jelinek was the head, started the Yale School of Addiction Studies. I don't know what year, but it's now the Rutgers School. But he studied alcoholism more than anything. And he developed this model from the earliest stages of addiction, like occasional relief use, to more consistent release use, really dealing to deal with feelings and such, into more grandiose and aggressive behaviors and breaking of promises, loss of interest in the work, they don't work, conflict with family and friends, those kinds of things. That the best way I can describe it using the mobile analogy is that the normal that you want to go back to was back here. And so as this person that you love dearly it advances in their illness, if you think about all the symptoms that were listed on the previous slide, that this system has to learn how to adjust to. That by the time they go from here to where they start getting into treatment here, and then other people have been through multiple treatments that are down here, this system has adjusted, maybe very unconsciously, to begin to cope and to survive and to continue to do whatever they need to do to keep their loved one alive, but also to make sure the other family members are okay as well. And so if you go back to normal, this normal has shifted to be able to survive with someone who is in this active using period. That has become the new normal. And so if this was normal, this new normal is what we would call procedurally developed, meaning you've spent so much time adjusting and shifting and coping and hoping and doing the things that you do that your current interactional pattern is designed to deal with this guy while they're using. If we go to the next slide, this is the path that the individual is going to take from detox into residential treatment and other areas of growth to get to a point of sobriety. If this person gets sober and this system is still functioning in that new normal, which functions best in trying to protect itself and to protect their loved one when they're using, it's going to create an inherent crisis or conflict between the person getting sober and the family as they're trying to cope. And so, long story short, I'm proposing that as your loved one begins to make these changes, that the family system also begin to make changes. And that family healing is not the creation of a new normal, it's the creation of a newer normal. A healthier normal than this family has had probably as far back as back here. And I hope that makes sense. And again, it's not a matter of blame. It's a matter of living in a. If you read chronic disease, research and literature, it talks about the adjustments that families begin to make to live with chronic disease prior to the diagnosis of that chronic disease. And then once the person's been diagnosed, the family has to begin to find new ways of helping that person live with this disease that they have, while also getting the needs of all the other family members met. And so what I'm asking is that, as you're working with Annie, that there will be several things over the course of time that we'll want to take a look at to help you begin to be healthier, healthiest, as your loved one begins to make this and make this growth. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope I was able to express that in a way that my PhD is in marriage and family therapy. And I have always believed that we don't do a very good job in the addiction world of treating families as families. And we take the loved one that has the addiction out of the family, put them into treatment. We support families in whatever ways we can. But there are better ways for families to actually begin to heal. And we would like to help you take that next step. And so when we begin to talk about trauma, this was a quote from a research project that I had done back when I lived in Sarasota, Florida. And I was working at Sarasota Memorial Hospital, and we had just built a brand new family program in the psychiatric hospital that I was the clinical director. And families weren't really coming to the program, and so I did a research project to kind of see where the families were. And this was the mother of a 20-year-old female heroin addict. And I will always remember her statement. And so she said, "It's really been overwhelming. I can sit here calmly and talk now, but that's not the same as when I don't know where my daughter is and what's happening, and I'm getting phone calls from somebody on the street saying that she's been beaten and she's been raped. I mean, really bad things are happening to her. It's not such a calm feeling when you get those phone calls, or you get phone calls in the middle of the night. I think there's some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder for families going through this." And my dissertation research at Florida State was on the secondary trauma of parents of children who have life-threatening injuries or illnesses and end up receiving treatment in pediatric intensive care units. And what we found was that the family members actually experienced most of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder as if they were the primary trauma survivor. And we called that secondary or systemic traumatic stress disorder, with the idea that the family begins to make those same adjustments to deal with the symptoms of this person that they love who's getting sicker and sicker, and that things like enabling. I don't have time in this video to go into it. I'll do a video for our family, another one for our family program that looks at this. But enabling is a trauma response. Boundary issues and enmeshment are ways that family members create an environment in which they believe they have some control and safety, so that they can feel safe because of the person they love being in such difficult circumstances. When I was at Cedar, which is the University of Colorado Hospital, I did a research study, and it says an N of 260, but there were like 350 family members who had gone through our program. And we asked them a number of questions, but one of them was a question just simply, living with an addict can be traumatizing. Agree, disagree? And 74% of the family members that we asked said that they strongly agreed that their loved one's addiction caused them to experience a sense of being traumatized. 21% said that they agreed. That's 95% of all the family members that were part of that study agreed that loving someone with an active addiction was traumatizing to them. And so, again, how families deal with their loved one's addiction and their trauma is really complicated. Every family really does it differently. But we know that family history of addiction and or trauma in previous generations can impact how a family tries to deal with addiction or trauma in the current generation. And so we call it transgenerational transmission of, or like an epigenetic, or the environment impacts how the genetic processes work in order to help that family cope. And so we use the same, or we use what we have learned from our experiences in prior generations to help us to cope with our current generation struggles to the best of our ability. And so oftentimes Annie will ask family members, was there any history of addiction in your family? people will get offended by that, and it's really not to be intrusive or to be digging into your business as much as it is to help us understand what's the possibility that there is this sort of transgenerational issue that we can really help the family begin to deal with and learn from. And I tend to use the same example here, that if this is your family and this little fish over here, this guy is the person that is in treatment with us, and these are the parents and this is a sibling, then this is one of the parents' families of origin, and this is the other one. Or if your husband is here, your partner is here, this may be your family of origin as a partner, and this may be your partner, our client's family of origin. And so, so often there's addiction, mental health issues, depression, trauma. I grew up in Pennsylvania, near Altoona, a little town called Hollidaysburg. And it was a big railroad area. So people worked in the railroad where we lived, and others worked in the coal mines, and others worked in Pittsburgh or Johnstown or somewhere in the steel mills. And so the amount of trauma that happened in train accidents and mining accidents and those kinds of things were very famous and well known. And we look at how those events caused these families to deal with losses and to deal with significant events that impacted how this generation managed losses and addiction, and then impacts how this generation. And so, again, it is not at all about blame, but about saying, is this something that I might learn from? Is this something, I say to our clients a lot, what if this is more complicated than you think? And I'm going to say the same thing to you. And that, we always try to solve problems based on how we understand them. And it kind of goes into the next slide. And I title it, If I Tell You, Will You Do It? And Albert Einstein once said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. And so it is not unusual for families to ask me or to ask Annie, what do you think we should do? Like, we've tried everything. What do you think we should do? And there was a time when I would just answer them. And I would say, well, based on everything you've told me, here's what I think. And invariably, people would either say, okay, thanks. Others would say, well, we've already tried that, and it's probably not going to work. And others would say, here's all the reasons that that's not a good solution. And I would just say, okay, well, that's what I would do. That's my thought. And I started thinking that it wasn't a very helpful conversation, because it didn't really get to the point that I had hoped that it would get to. And so I was watching a TED Talk by Simon Sinek, and he's a business writer, and he wrote a book called It Starts With Why. And he said that people will ask all the time, so what do you think we should do? And how should we do it? What should we do? And, he said that there are business people all over the world with bookshelves full of books on what to do and how to do it, and people still don't do it. And he said the reason is people fail to ask the most important question. And the most important question is, why should we do it? And so when people now ask me, what do you think we should do? I ask them, well, if I tell you, will you do it? And I would ask you to think, well, how would you answer that question? Because when I ask families, what do you think the most common answer is, they say yes. And it's almost never yes. It's not very often no either. For the most part, it's, well, it depends on what you tell us. And so I started thinking about that, and that what they're saying is it depends on if what you're telling us meets our understanding of the problem and what we think are the right things to do. And it's human nature to do that. Like we don't often come up with solutions that don't fit our understanding of the problem. And so that usually starts a discussion about why and how open people are to thinking that maybe all of their best efforts have been with the greatest of intention, but the way they understand the problem and the way they understand the solution may be more complicated than it looks. And so, again, I'm not asking you to do anything other than be open to the possibility that some of this might be the case. But I want to challenge you to why should you do something different than maybe what you've done in the past?